I think what we are dealing with right now is a broader conservative, however you want to call that, membership of the church that is really struggling.
I'm spending money like I just got paid. $100 bills, tell them keep the change. Come on.
There's a very big difference between public advocacy and private ministry.
Pop a bottle, about to make it rain. Let me give you something now to celebrate. Come on.
Peacemaker, that's a tough one. I'll be honest. I don't feel a lot of peace.
And if you're wondering why I move the way I do, I just feel so good.
I think that we do need to engage for a few reasons. Number one, to show our fellow members of the church that contrary to the culture we've grown up in, it is okay to question. It is okay to foster dialogue. It is okay to wonder about decisions that the corporate church is making and have conversations about that.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to Ward Radio. We got a morning edition for you here. I am joined via the interwebs with a dream team here that is going to respond to a recent Axios article in which your favorite show, Ward Radio, was invoked. I don't know if I want to say invoked or besmirched, but there's been a couple of articles in which we've been in the news, a recent one by Axios, as well as another article by Matthew Bowman at the Salt Lake Tribune, where also our boys Jacob Hansen and Greg Matsen and Connor Boyack were also mentioned in, some might consider, a pejorative way. So I've actually assembled the Avengers here. I've assembled a mini dream team, okay? We've got everybody via the interwebs, via Zoom here, to respond to this article and actually react and give their thoughts. And there's an opinion, some pushback as to what was said about Ward Radio and Quick Media and Connor and all the others. So without any further ado, we've got Connor Boyack here. We've got Jacob Hansen, my boy Brad Whitbeck, and Greg Matsen, who were all mentioned in this article, and three of which were actually in the original podcast mentioned as well. So, you know what? Let's just dive right in, guys. Without any further ado, let's just dive right in and say what's going on. Greg, can you tell us what just happened, my friend? You're one of the more well-measured people. Tell us what's going on.
I don't know about that, but you know, this is what's always interesting, right? So this is all about the comms director, the new comms director that is hired in Salt Lake. There's a response to that. It's not just us here. There's quite a few people that have a lot of questions about it. But in the media, this is what typically would happen. I don't even consider myself that far right at all. But you go to Axios, and of course, anyone who disagrees with a certain agenda that the media is going to carry is all of a sudden labeled and strawmanned to the point of far right, alt right, and many other terms. There was a podcast also that was put out there by another LDS influencer who had everyone being MAGA and everyone being DesNat. And, somehow if you disagree with a certain progressive agenda, a certain media agenda, then you must be all the way over to the end of the spectrum. And I think that's really what we should be talking about, because that is not the case. In fact, I would say that's not the case with everybody here.
Okay, and I'm actually just going to, without burying the lead, just tell everybody exactly what was said about this, about us. So, here's the title of the article. For those of you who are listening on the radio, I'm going to read it really fast. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, it's on your screen, but it's written by Aaron Alberti, and it says, Mormon church hire triggers conservative backlash. All right. And the opening lines are, some prominent conservatives are raising objections to the new communications director for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, saying his ties to LGBTQ plus advocacy and quote globalism, end quote, disqualify him for the post. Okay, I don't know if that's exactly what we were saying. I know that our podcast at least was titled we have some questions. So I think that might be an exaggeration, but we do know that Connor Boyack and Jacob Hansen are filthy insurrectionists. So with beards like that, I'm sure that they were raging online in their MAGA hats, though Connor's actually libertarian, which is kind of funny. But anyway, the article continues saying, driving the news, Aaron Shrinian, previously an executive with the church's nonprofit Desert Management Corporation, was named head of public affairs and communications last week. Scroll down, it says what happened, and this is where it gets dicey. Right-wing accounts on social media began basically protesting why it matters. Several of Sherinian's critics are influential in conservative politics with track records of mobilizing people and affecting policy. Good job, Greg. You're a thorough mobilizer, and then they mention State Representative Trevor Lee. And then here's Connor, who leads a libertarian think tank Libertas, slammed Sherinian's praise for corporate DEI efforts and described his support for gender equity to remedy climate change and poverty as, quote, globalist gobbledygook. And then they quoted me from Ward Radio. But I think where people took issue was the classification of everybody on, this is where I think most people bristled a little bit. It says the other side. And I get we live in a binary world, but like every time you pave the road for civil unrest and really, really bad action, especially in political conversation, it's by painting with the most broad brush possible. And I can't think of a broader brush than literally just, I think what I think is correct think, and everything else is the other side. Now, that may not have been the author's intention, but, it could come across that way. And our boy Jim Bennett was quoted as saying, MAGA Mormons are losing their minds. Former Deseret News columnist Jim Bennett said on a podcast Wednesday, they're active members of the church that think they're doing a service by trashing a good man because they don't agree with his politics. I don't think that's totally accurate. I think most people were calling into question some previous posts. But anyway, basically, we got lumped in before their reality check and flashback with the terminologies and the phraseologies far right and MAGA Mormons and so on and so forth, which I'll just go first really fast and get mine out of the way so you guys can talk as much as possible. I thought it was a little bit odd because I don't know if you guys knew this, but Kwaku L, my co-host, been a co-host since our very first podcast, was literally head of the BYU Democrats. He's never been a registered Republican in his life, never self-identified as far right by any means, and only ever supported actually Democrat candidates, such as he was a big fan of, oh, come on, who's a really cool Supergirl that got censored by Google? Help me out, Connor. She wore that white dress when she went after Hillary Clinton.
You thinking Tulsi Gabbard?
Tulsi Gabbard, that's what. He was a Tulsi Gabbard girl and so on and so forth back in the day. I was actually the number one channel for, this is like some ancient political lore from 2019, for Andrew Yang back when I ran the show Problem Solver Politics, okay? And Brad's freaking Canadian, so he's socialist. And then poor Connor here. And a theater kid,
Oh, wow. That's 2 strikes, Brett.
And then, I know. And then poor Connor here, he's libertarian. They're the redheaded stepchildren of politics that get the worst of both worlds in terms of treatment, but have the best of both worlds in terms of politics. So he got roped in with us as well. Everybody's getting mistreated here. So I just wanted to get our little group together here and let you guys opine and just say what you thought, what you took issue with, give a little pushback, say your piece, and then we'll be out. So why don't we just start and go clockwise here? Connor, my man, just introduce yourself, tell us what you took issue with, and we'll just start the conversation there. Connor, go.
All right. So I, as the Axios article said, I run a think tank in Utah. Been around for about 13 years. We've changed over 100 laws. And in that capacity, I've done, you might say, political battle with the church a number of times on a variety of different issues in Utah, because they do get involved in state politics. They get involved in federal politics. And I think Greg was right to point out that this Brother Sherinian is a communications director, but in that capacity, he is also overseeing the entire government affairs program of the church, and therefore how the church is going to manage its lobbying, going through the front door, or more often going through the back door and secretly and privately meeting with legislators. So a lot of my concern comes down to what Jim Bennett derided as Sherinian's politics. My concern is more his worldview. Yes, I'm libertarian. I'm definitely not conservative. I have no idea what conservatives actually stand for. I think the term is meaningless, but you can see how reporters like this try to describe or lump you into this kind of binary thing that we're doing. But I actually just try and call myself a Christian. I think that if we're truly living the gospel, that has political ramifications and doesn't neatly fall into any party or any particular bucket. And it's for that reason that I have been so concerned with Brother Sherinian, because he and I have a vastly different worldview. And yes, the LGBTQIA plus, whatever we call it these days, is, I think, a problem in light of the church's doctrine. But I think another massive problem is his globalism, is his ties to the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and climate activism and reproductive rights and all these things that are hard, progressive left and things that I think that are often incompatible with our doctrines. So I'm raising the question of, this guy has significant, or will have significant influence on the brethren in advising them on positions to take, statements to make, how to engage with the membership through communications, how to engage with the public. And for that reason, I think he deserves the scrutiny that he's receiving because of his past, which I think is pretty checkered from a doctrinal perspective.
Okay. And in all fairness to Jim Bennett, he has reached out and has offered to give us pushback on what was said during our podcast, and all you guys are all invited. That actually just happened about I'd say 2 or 3 minutes ago.
I'm in.
Going into recording. You're in. Yeah. Oh boy. Whoo! I don't know if I'm ready for that because you're both my friends. All right. So
it sounds like a blast, dude.
Yes.
I'll help mediate.
Yeah, you'll help mediate. Canada. Yeah, it's kind of the Switzerland of North America, right? You know what I'm saying? I'm not
cold.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cold. It's cold and full of white people. So no, which is
Snow
actually
White is the politically correct term, Carden.
Yeah, dude, Snow White. That's hilarious. Which, by the way, is like factually completely untrue. Like where you
not even close to
where you grew up, and like if you ever go to like Montreal or Toronto or any of the big cities, you know that's like completely false. But anyway, all right. So, Greg, hit us. What were your first thoughts when you saw this? What were you thinking, man?
Well, I want to go off of what Connor was saying, because I agree 100%. This is always looked at as a left and right issue. It's not necessarily just left and right. I understand these things can be dropped into these buckets, and that's where the battle always wants to be. We want to be in a binary, and you know that way everybody has an enemy. But that's not really what it is. It is a worldview. It is an ideology, right? It's not just about politics. Politics are secondary. The worldview is primary, and the doctrine. Right. So the issue is, you know, whether you're on the left or on the right is the law of chastity doctrine. And what does it mean to be an ally? What does it mean to be pushing the pride flag and pride colors and everything else? For a lot of people, that just means love and support of somebody that they know. But that's not all it is. That's not what everything means. You look at the Confederate flag. You know, if I'm waving the Confederate flag and if I were putting a Confederate flag in a temple in Georgia, and I put the temple in with a Confederate flag over it and in the colors of the Confederate flag, what are people going to say? It's a worldview. It's an agenda. And I don't think that these things belong together. I don't think the gospel belongs together with that type of a worldview. I think it's dangerous. I think it's bad for the church. And I think it's completely contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ and its doctrine. So we don't just look at, well, boy, this guy must be a Democrat or a Republican, or he's on the left or he's on the right. I don't care if what his, quite frankly, what his voting is or anything else. I don't care if he's a Democrat or a Republican or anything else, or if he's a Green Party even. I don't care. I care about an agenda. I care about a worldview. And if you look at what he's done in the past, and he's probably, again, I want to qualify everything. He's probably a great guy. I'd love to sit down and have lunch with him. That's not the issue, right? I just, the worldview is a problem. If you go all the way back even to December, just last month, I've got videos of, I've seen him talking about development and sustainability. I mean, he pushes it almost everywhere, the 2030 agenda at the United Nations. And that's not a conspiracy theory. You go and look at what it is and how it has to be accomplished, and the 17 goals and the 167 points that are underneath it. I'm sorry, it's a concern. There's concern, and it's okay to have that type of a concern.
So here's my question. You and Connor have been doing this for a long time, being more at the forefront of political issues. Like I'm stuck in the studio with Kwaku, who's like literally making podcasts about like dinosaurs not being real and what was the firmament, and then like arguing with flat earthers and stuff, like, you know what I'm saying? Like we do crazy weird stuff. Kwaku. Yeah, like so I'm strapped to Kwaku's hip. So I've been talking about every weird off the beaten path. Like I actually know what Lemuria, Tartaria, and mud floods are. And like Connor's like, what on earth, right? These are things you wouldn't say. These are things you would not bring up in polite society. But you guys who deal a lot more with the political issue, the only thing that really concerned me is, I mean, I'm looking at this I'm seeing terminologies invoked like MAGA Mormons. We had Scott Vance saying that like our show was deeply concerning and far right, represented, extremism and the Trump agenda and his policies. And how have you guys been effectively able to communicate? I don't want to say combat, because people always use straw men to attack you, but like, something that's really deeply puzzled me and worried me, frankly, for the health of our republic and our church, is this idea that really, if you do not feel like you agree with ostensibly not even liberal, but progressive, deeply progressive policies and politics, you therefore must be MAGA Mormon. You therefore must be an extremist. You therefore must be, we got an email from Scott Vance that invoked the insurrection, of which none of us were there or participated, right? It's crazy. So, I mean, I look at this and I'm like, how have you guys been able to overcome that? Like our republic, our society cannot survive if this is the behavior that we engage in. And a frustration of mine has been, if we're far right, because simply we say, I lived in California where we were locked down for almost 2 years straight because of really insane COVID lockdown policies that I thought were unconstitutional and immoral. And so if we're electing somebody who has to do with the messaging of politics and morality from our church, and he's got multiple posts saying, oh, lockdown's good, vax up good, face masks good, like I kind of am concerned, like, are you going to want to shut us down again next time there's another pandemic or whatever? I wasn't even worried about the LGBTQ allyship stuff, because I kind of see a way where you can split those hairs and still be a faithful member and so on and so forth. My biggest concern was the COVID policies. But like, if you can't take issue with somebody's response to the pandemic without being called far right, my question is, okay, well, if we're far right because we simply say, hold on, I got some questions here, what is regular right? Like, I still don't know.
That doesn't exist, Cardin. That's sort of the issue here. The problem is that the way even people within our church, like Jim Bennett, right? What they do is they look at the world through this lens of,
be nice to my boy. He's coming on afterwards. You're going to have to be in a podcast with him. You're going to have to be in a podcast with him.
They're looking through the wrong lens. They're looking through the lens of left and right. I don't care about left and right. I care about right and wrong. I care about truth and falsehood. If I approach politics in any way, my only concern, and Connor, I think, will appreciate this, is I, as a religious person, am looking at it from the perspective of the use of violence. Because if the state is ultimately something that is utilizing violence, well, my religious beliefs have very strong beliefs about the moral use of violence, right? To make people do things, okay? So we have to change the way this entire thing is framed. The thing that should unite all of us as Latter-day Saints is that our top priority is following the Savior. And so we shouldn't look at things through the lens of left and right. We should look at through the lens as Moroni 7 would have us look at it, which is to look through things. Does this align with Christ or does it not? Is this right? Is this wrong? Is this true? Is this false? The politics and the right-left lens, it's the wrong lens to use.
Okay. I will just defer one last time to my question. Maybe, who knows, maybe Diplomatic Brad can answer this. Maybe Connor has. In your guys' experience of dealing politically online so much, Jacob, once you asked and you said the biggest problem you had with the phraseology toxic masculinity is that when you ask people to describe what is genuine, authentic, and good masculinity, they can't do it without using feminine descriptors, right? So, Connor, you're libertarian. You guys are always trying to bounce in between the two political ideologies and be friends with everybody, right? Have you been able to encounter a definition of what is, I guess, correct conservative or else acceptable Republican or something that you can point to? Because I've actually been amazed that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is not more of a political unifier, because the doctrine of Christ really does have the best of both worlds. It has, like, I think what is at the heart of bleeding heart liberalism, you know what I'm saying? This intense care for your fellow man, as, you know, your fellow child of deity and a child of God. And sure, we can argue about how much of a role the government should take in that and so on and so forth. But I feel it's got the best of like bleeding heart liberalism with a concept of like justice and strength and accountability that comes from more conservative circles and so on and so forth. So you, as a libertarian, have you ever been able to kind of point to a definition that will assuage the Axios article writers of this world that is like correct conservative? Or are we just all lost and we need to build a compound somewhere and just remove ourselves from society?
Cardin, I think it's like asking if an evangelical online publication is going to fairly and accurately represent our doctrinal views and our understanding, right? I mean, you may encounter that from time to time, but they're always going to resort to, you know, some ad hominems, some stereotypes. There's going to be fallacies galore based on their limited worldview. I think these individuals, they're busy. They have to take mental shortcuts. They have to communicate to an audience that knows the term Mormon, but they don't want to say the member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so I mean, as a libertarian, conservatives think I'm liberal and liberals think I'm conservative. And so there's just rampant confusion when you don't fit into that mold. Which I think is an important thing to do. I think the gospel of Jesus Christ is inherently disruptive to normative conventions that society has devolved into. And so for me, like, as I think about my political activity or then also my kind of religious evangelism, I think of a quote from Alistair McGrath. He said that argument does not create conviction, but the lack of it destroys belief. So if I go back to Axios, and I know Erin Alberti, she used to be a reporter for the Salt Lake Tribune, and she's covered a number of the things that we've done. These are, you know, she's a fine person, but she does come from a worldview that does want to reduce us to a particular far right, you know, perspective. But if I go interact with progressive leftists and I try to defend my views and my worldview against what they're saying, that's an argument. That argument is not going to create conviction, as the quote just said. I'm not going to convince them. I'm not going to persuade them. That's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because of the second part of the quote, that the lack of argument destroys belief. I think what we are dealing with right now is a broader conservative, however you want to call that, membership of the church that is really struggling. I get DMs all the time. So I have a podcast called Sunday Musings where I talk a lot about this every Sunday. I get DMs all the time from conservative Republican Mormons who are deeply struggling with what the church, the direction that the church is taking. Cardin, you mentioned COVID. That was a big part of it. It's happened, you know, long before that when the church got into the medical marijuana.
Biznatch slapped Elijah for 2 years in California. Like literally our church bowed to the golden idol for 2 years, man. And it was something we used to look at the parable of David being locked in the lion's den with primary lessons from teachers that said, well, we live in America, so you could never get imprisoned for exercising your religious beliefs. But in ancient Israel, there were kings who could throw you in prison for wrongthink. And like, we literally laughed at it in the 90s as never being able to happen. And then Brad's compatriots are arresting pastors up in Canada. And here in California, you're fined $25,000 or whatever it was if you like are singing in a parking lot socially distanced from 6 feet people apart. So yeah, the hypocrisy is astounding. I'm sorry, continue, Connor. Oh, but before you continue, I do have to say I can see why they're confused, because you are wearing a super cool hoodie that makes you look surf and skate cool, but you do have you do have the insurrectionist beard like Jacob Hansen. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like you're kind of like business up top,
mixed
but party
signals
on the bottom, mixed signals. Yeah.
I'm literally wearing surf attire, bare surfboards. You know?
Okay, I don't know, bro. I don't know. You just you look like you were in the rotunda. Anyway, keep going, Connor.
Okay, so I'll wrap up my point briefly so we can get others here in the conversation. So I think that we do need to engage for a few reasons. Number one, to show our fellow members of the church that contrary to the culture we've grown up in, it is okay to question. It is okay to foster dialogue. It is okay to wonder about decisions that the corporate church is making and have conversations about that. We don't need to be, you know, whispering in the hallway and keeping that to ourselves. That it's okay to do so. And then number two, to show them that people coming from a perspective of faith, trying to build up faith in Jesus Christ, trying to help people's testimonies, can ask these unconventional questions and provide a forum in which we can scrutinize someone like Brother Sherinian rather than just think, well, the brethren must have had their, reasons, and so I'm just going to quietly move on and not pay attention. So argument in this case, in this context, engaging with our progressive friends, pushing back against the Axios, the Tribs, the Jim Bennett's, whoever, to me boils down to one fundamental goal, and that is I want all of the sideline viewers, the passive consumers of all of our podcasts, our fellow parishioners at church, I want them all to understand what the arguments are so that as they engage with their family and with their friends and with their coworkers, they at least know how to better articulate and defend their beliefs and give voice and vocabulary to what they're questioning and dealing with, rather than feeling like they're alone, like they should keep silent, like they should, put their concerns on the shelf and just not deal with them, only for the shelf to break later. That's why I think it's important that we engage on these issues, including with the progressives, not to convince them, not to persuade them, but to demonstrate to everybody else what the arguments are.
Okay, Brad. Actually, Brad, Greg, Jacob, all of you guys, whoever has a good answer to this. We could always go tit for tat and debunk whatever Erin said. I'll share with you guys an email that I sent with her before we go. We do have to wrap up here pretty soon, but I take seriously this idea that, blessed are the peacemakers. And I think that just as I said before, I'm surprised that the church isn't more of a unifier, because it seems like it has the best of all political ideas in one faith, and there's so much for us to rally around. Jacob, Brad, actually we'll do Brad first because he hasn't talked a lot and he's the most diplomatic guy. But if you guys could all shortly share something that has helped you find peace when you're in disparate situations with other members that maybe might be frustrated, with, I don't know, your point of view as expressed online or something like that. Brad, you can start, but if any of you guys have any wisdom that you could give our audience as to how you've been able to be a peacemaker when different politics are in our church butting heads, that'd be super appreciated. So Brad, you go first, and anybody else wants to jump in, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that has done that for me has been rather than getting lost in the weeds of whatever dichotomy has been thrown on top of us, right? Looking at okay, no, what do you actually want though? What do you see as good in the world? What is your worldview? And do ours align? What is true in what you believe? And do I agree with it, right? And build from where we agree on things. And I have found that to be by far the most useful way to approach any conversation like this. Because if we don't do that, we end up having people write articles like this, where they're saying, oh yeah, we're going to boil down the Ward Radio Show thing to the initial question asked by the host and ignore the rest of the conversation that was had, including all of the nuance on whether maybe this was blowing everything out of proportion. Maybe this means the church is headed this direction. They ignored all of that. They just are writing an article focused on where people differ, right? So I think if we in our personal conversations can talk with people about, hey, where do we agree? What truth is there in the things that you believe, and how can we build on those things together? That'll get us the right direction. Like what Ammon did with King Lamoni, right? He starts off, do you believe there's a God? And he's like, what are you talking about?
Well,
he says, no.
That's what I was going to say is I love the King Lamoni example. We're very familiar with the scriptural reasons. Well, what would you say to somebody in church that says, hey, dude, I read an Axios article that says you don't like Sherinian. He's an LGBTQ ally. I got an LGBTQ son. What's your problem with LGBTQ people? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, because that's one of the most important things. And this is something I think Greg handled really well in one of his episodes he did about this, is they're going to have this smokescreen over it that they think, oh, you're against him for this worldview that he has. That must mean you hate LGBTQ people, right? That's going to be their takeaway, because that's the kind of takeaway that benefits, honestly, writers at Axios. It gets them more clicks. And so we need to fight back against that. Guess what? No, that doesn't mean I hate people who are of different beliefs and worldviews than me. I just want to talk about what the differences in those worldviews are going to do as an impact for us, right? I actually do love God and I do love my neighbor, and I think we can balance those things, right? So let's talk about it. I think it's fine that you have family members who are LGBTQ. That's nothing against them, right? But this is something where we need to figure out how to be in the world but not of the world.
Okay, I
think it's going to be kind of handled on an individual basis.
Yeah, rock on. Jacob, whew, I think you're the one with the biggest uphill bridge to build here. Because Greg, he looks Greg, he's not as intimidating. Like you look like you got a musket and a trowel somewhere in that blue room of yours. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just kidding.
It's literally on my wall behind me. You've been in my studio. There is a musket on the wall.
So what's?
Oh my gosh!
You've been in.
That was before any of the musket and trowel stuff. That's because
you've been in bishoprics, bro. I'm sure you've had to deal with this. How you been a peacemaker? Try and do it in a minute, my man.
Okay, so for me, it's this. There's a very big difference between public advocacy and private ministry. People who know me in like my ward, they don't like, if you were to be like, man, how do you deal with Jacob? They'd be like, wait, what? Like Brother Hanson's like super nice. And I've ministered to LGBTQ kids. I had one of them come to me and tell me he thought he was trans, and we had a great conversation of it, and he no longer thinks he's trans. And so I've had young men that were in my young men's group that I was working with who are now trans. I've been there. I've been in the trenches in all of this. And I can tell you what I say online in the public forum and the public discussion is not the same thing that I'm going to say to someone who's sitting there, who's dealing with a personal issue. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm betraying my principles, but the tactic is different. As Connor rightly pointed out, you don't argue someone into, like, that isn't the way you actually convince people of things, right? The argument doesn't create the belief, but we need to have forums where we have public advocacy where that happens. But in private ministry with people, with the members of your ward, you shouldn't be like, what is the purpose of me debating with some kid about LGBT issues? It's not going to help them. I need to listen to them. I need to connect to them. I need them to know that I'm there for them. Right. So once you make that differentiation between what it is to actually minister to someone by the Spirit of the Lord, which is the thing that actually changes people's hearts, which oftentimes doesn't involve argument almost at all, versus public advocacy, which is the world of argument and conversation and debate. You just have to have those in different worlds. And if you do that, you'll have very good relationships with people.
All right, rock on. Greg, give us your last tips and tricks, and then I'm going to have you guys tell me what you thought of the email I sent Aaron Alberti, and that'll be our outro. So Greg, wise Greg, who has been fighting these fights. He's a happy conservative warrior. Hit us, bro. What do you do to overcome that?
I would not say conservative. I've never considered myself conservative, but some people call me that.
Okay.
But peacemaker, that's a tough one. I'll be honest. I don't feel a lot of peace. Always with the podcast. I get hit from all sides. I get hit from the right. I get hit from the left. And I don't know that, it's interesting to me when I read the scriptures and read about Christ's life, he always talks about peace right in the middle of chaos, whether he's out in the sea or other places. He's talking about, have peace when you're in the middle of chaos. I mean, peace to me, at least for me personally, is feeling that I am bound to true principles. And I think if you don't feel that, if you don't have some type of a connection to that, I don't know how you can go out and to the world and talk about things. I like what Connor was saying also. I try to give awareness. That's the number one thing I look at. And number two would be education and clarity. I'm not an activist. I don't typically try to do other things than that. I'm trying to give awareness and as I've said before, walk the edge of the sword. And I think that if you really want to find truth, because, things that aren't true, you've got a little bit of truth and you've got a little bit of chaos and deceit. You have to be able to parse that out, and you have to be able to walk the edge of the sword between those two to be able to see what is real. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And so if you can help articulate that, I think that works. But because you're doing that, you've got both sides that are then oftentimes coming after you. The last thing I would say is you try not to go after individuals. That doesn't mean that you don't bring them up and talk about them. If they've been public in what they've said, I think that means you can talk about them. But I don't think that you try to go after the character of an individual. That to me is what that would be the contention. But if you're trying to do what is right in a world that is going downhill, you're going to enter conflict constantly. And I think you've got to be prepared for that.
Cool. All right. Well, we're just going to end it right there, man. I'm not going to bore you guys with the details of my email because that was touching. That was great. You guys have far more wisdom than I do. And also, Greg's got to go. He wins Cool Dad of the Year Award. Be honest, Greg, where you going? I promised you'd be out by this minute right here. Why do you got to be out? Tell the audience, bro. It's cool, bro. It's cool.
Heading to Two Towers, second of the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings.
He's Lord of the Rings binging with his kids, and he promised that by 4:30 he'd be able to watch the third installment of Lord of the Rings. This guy's soaking up everything Peter Jackson was putting down for 3 years straight in 3 days with his family, and he's even committed to buying the cape and the sword and LARPing like the dudes in the quad at BYU with their fake swords and everything. It's going to be awesome. So anyway, everybody, this has been great. This has been awesome. I'm going to put links to all you guys' profiles and your stuff in the description of this video. So make sure you guys send it to me so I can do that. For this and more, guys, please check us out at wardradio.com. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. It was fun to shoot and it was fun to edit, and we're super glad that you can hang out with us. Before we go on to the next video, I need you to do 3 things, okay? First, yes, you gotta like, you gotta share, you gotta subscribe, all of that jazz. Please do it. It helps us with the algorithms, and it also helps your friends know about all of our good content. Second, I need you, if you're into this kind of thing, to check out Brad's book, Dragon Thief. My buddy Brad is super talented, but he's a horrible self-promoter, and he's too humble and nice to try and like tell people to go buy his book, so I have to do it for him. But he doesn't know I'm doing this. This is kind of a surprise. He has not paid me for this. I don't get any kickbacks, though I should, Brad. So when you watch this, let's consider helping a brother out. No, I'm totally just kidding. Dragon Thief is the name of the book, and there's even a sequel. I believe it's called Dragon Guard coming out, okay? I'm in the middle of the first book, so I can't talk about the second one yet, but it's really cool. I mean, this is good stuff, and it's got the reviews to prove it. He's winning all kinds of awards and has become an actual international bestseller. And the best part is, this is how he stays financially independent and able to come on our show. He's an author. He's a professional author. So buy his book, give it a review on Amazon. It's available wherever fine books are sold, which nowadays pretty much unfortunately just means Amazon. Buy a copy, get it shipped to your house, buy a copy for your friends, tell your friends about it, get a copy for your abuela. I don't care if she speaks another language and doesn't read English, get one for her too. The book is awesome. You will enjoy it, I promise. And the third thing you gotta do is, if you can, please consider joining this channel or supporting us through the Cash App or Venmo. We're on all those platforms, and that's really what keeps these lights on. So, in an attention economy, thank you for paying attention to this video and for watching this film and just hanging out with us here. It's been an absolute blast. If you guys want to see anything more of what we have to offer, please check us out on wardradio.com. Please send us cash if you can. Please share this with your friends if you can. And before you go, like and share. And if you haven't subscribed, shame on you. Subscribe or die.